are, but we can no doubt have a few questions.
Questions?
Here we are together. Won't get a better chance, yes, Alan.
For Jeremy, about the history of mathematics and the history of science. Minnesota, to be brief, we have a model where the historians of science have joint appointments with the science or math departments. And Roger Stewart this time was the head of our program. And we were trying to get a historian of math. And basically we had to abandon it because the mathematicians didn't really want anyone who wasn't a mathematician. And there are not a lot of them. Do you have any comment on that? The mathematicians' attitude towards historians of math.
Well, that's a vexed topic. What can I say? Some of them have no time for ritual. And I think they think of it as background noise, right? You know, they've worked out their way of doing mathematics, and along comes some guy taking them through how the guys used to do it before I got it right. You know, so they just don't like it. The paradox, I think, sort of echoing Jesper in a way, is that the weak interaction extends over the whole period of mathematics. You could give a talk on Apollonius and say things that mathematicians would go, oh, wow, that's smart. Who's this Greek guy, right? So in a way that I think has been suggested already today, you can't so obviously do with science, that somehow it dates in a way that, well, mathematics dates, but it's more complicated. So I find mathematicians it's very varied. The international, the Congress of Mathematicians every 4 years has 20 slots, and one of them has always been for history, and we hope it keeps it that way. There are international prizes that they sometimes hand out. The American Mathematical Society has a sort of friendly attitude to publishing, sort of, don't take your career in that direction, but sometimes things seep through. I think they want to feel, if they employ someone, that they're a full member of the department, which seems reasonable to me. And that makes it hard to cross this history of science, history of mathematics divide that I think I'm suggesting is not universal, but there's too much of it. And I think that they need persuading somehow. Warwick had Chris Zeman as a mathematician, and he had David Fowler as a good friend, and David Fowler took an interest in history. And so that's how that happened. I really don't know. I mean, I would like to think that you could be an expert on, that Noel could produce a wonderful student and the math department would take them on, although the student is doing more on Regiomontanus. That would be wonderful. I don't somehow see it. But mathematicians have to work out who they're educating and what they're educating to do. And unless they think they're only educating super smart mathematicians to do super smart research, then they have an educational task. And that educational task includes an appreciation of the breadth of and value of the subject, and it includes the ability to write. And I think historians have a claim to being able to do that I think is a vital part of education. So the struggle is on. I don't think it's lost, but it will always ever be partial at best. I don't know, maybe Jesper or the other speakers have a better idea, but that would be my thought.
Yeah, but when I was in Minnesota, as you remember, at some point, and I thought that the atmosphere there from the
It's really a follow-up question addressed primarily to Professor Gray, but also to the other speakers. And it's a question about the audience for this kind of work. When the subject matter of our work becomes so technical and demanding, then what is the audience that we are aiming at, given that mathematicians or physicists are not really excited about, history of science or mathematics, and then our colleagues are not really able to follow, this kind of work. So perhaps you may have some reflections on that problem as I see it.
So the question is, who's the audience for any of this stuff? And it's, It's really not clear. I take it none of us have been pursued by autograph seekers as we go shopping. One way, I mean, look, the proper way is to say, this question is important, I want to study this question, and it will eventually speak for itself, right? And good luck to us when we do that. But the more cynical answer would be to say what sells, and to persuade yourself that what sells is also what's important. And that's the kind of dialogue, I think, to be honest, one has to try and indulge in. So Jesper mentioned Lobachevsky, and Lobachevsky's work is part of a story. It's a complicated, indirect story that leads to changing ideas about the nature of space. And that seems to me to be something that reaches an audience, right? And you know, we're yards away from the Einstein papers here, so you all know how that story continues. I think it's legitimate to look for topics in mathematics that bear on the world in which people live today. If you want an audience beyond the specialist audience, now mathematicians do have access to historians of mathematics have access to a specialist audience of mathematicians, and they set certain standards and they deform our subject in certain ways and foster it in certain ways. But that's not, I think, what you're asking. It's a very difficult question for me to know how to reach historians of science other than through personal contacts and the strong interaction that Jesper was mentioning. But I think there are questions, and there are questions, for example, in history of statistics, obviously, but also in straight history of mathematics, where you can say, look, it is not intimidatingly difficult. I can show you in a talk that this has an impact on the society around you and the way we live. And there are certain strange things about mathematics which are oddly appealing. And I think that, we shouldn't forget that when we want to reach out. If you wanted to reach out, Marcus de Soitoy is a great success in England at reaching out to popular audiences, right, with bits of real mathematics, okay? It does speak to quite an audience, actually, for all the people in England that it's supposed to intimidate, right? It speaks to them. And in France, of course, there is no hostility to mathematics, right? You can reach, I've seen people fill an audience probably the size of the one downstairs for commemoration of Galois, right? So I think we should remember that our audience has certain needs and aspirations and interests. There's no reason why history of mathematics or any other science can't reach to that. The only problem I see, in a sense, is if I was to write a fictional account of a scientist, I wouldn't write a fictional account of a mathematician, because I think it's hard. The so what question remains, right? Which, in a way, answers your question by saying I don't know the answer. But it's very difficult to say what's so great about a mathematical idea, and the audience wants to hear that it, I don't know, cures cancer or something. So they're not going to get that. But that's not the only audience, you know. I mean, there are all sorts of ways of saying something about mathematics to an audience, and we need to do that. And I don't think history of mathematics here is that different from, well, for example, history of chemistry, right? Any science that isn't 20th century, right? You have an intellectual task to say, why does this matter? How has this shaped your life? Why should you care about it now? And if you start there, I think we can find things that might reach an audience. But we have to try. And that's enough homilies from me, but thank you for the question.
Well, this is a question we all care about, and the other thing we all care about is lunch. So thank you very much to all the speakers and to the audience, and we'll...